Myths, which are stories that are used to explain what we do not know, and contribute strongly to the stigma against people who have a mental illness. One way to help decrease stigma is to challenge myths with data and scientific knowledge. Myth busting may help decrease stigma. Mental illness myths categories. Myths about what causes mental illness. Myths about what people who have a mental illness are like. Myths about treatments for mental illnesses. These myths need myth busting. Myths about causes. Mental illnesses aren't real illnesses. Realities about causes. Mental illnesses are characterized by alterations in thinking, mood, or behavior associated with significantly impaired functioning. Mental illnesses are diagnosed by mental health professionals according to the International Standard Classification of Mental Disorders, such as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5, DSM-5, or the International Classification of Diseases, ICD. Myths about causes. Mental illnesses are caused by the usual stresses of everyday life. Mental illnesses are caused by poor mothering. Realities about causes. Everyday life stresses are normal and necessary for learning and developing life skills. They do not cause mental illnesses. For some people, severe and persistent stress, living in a war zone, increases the risk of developing a mental illness. Mothers have been blamed for many things, including causing mental illnesses. Poor mothering may not help children grow and develop well, but by itself does not cause mental illness. Myths about causes. Mental illnesses are caused by food that we commonly eat. Mental illnesses are the result of a moral failure or laziness. Realities about causes. Rare vitamin deficiencies, such as thiamine, B12, can be associated with some symptoms found in some mental illnesses, but foods we eat do not cause mental illness. Mental illnesses are not caused by a moral failing or laziness. Sometimes people with a mental illness experience severe fatigue or lack of interest as part of the illness, not as its cause. Myths about causes. Mental illnesses are caused by witchcraft, spells, or possession by demons. Mental illnesses are the result of punishment by a higher power, such as God or karma. Realities about causes. Mental illnesses are the result of disturbances in usual brain function that lead to difficulties with the control of feelings, thinking, and behaviors. Mental illnesses are not caused by spirits, witches, or demons. Mental illnesses are not the result of punishment from God or bad karma. Myths about people. Mental illness will never affect me. Realities about people. All of us will be affected by mental illnesses. Researchers estimate that as many as 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a mental illness at some point in their life. You may not experience a mental illness yourself, but it's very likely that a family member, friend, or coworker will experience a mental illness. Myths about people. People with mental illness are violent. People with a mental illness should not have the same rights as the rest of society. Realities about people. It is true that some people who have a mental illness may behave violently, but having a mental illness does not equal violent behavior. Most violence is not due to mental illness. People with mental illness are often likely to be victims of violence, including bullying. A person who has a mental illness has all the human and social rights that every other person has. Myths about people. People with mental illness cannot be good friends. People with mental illness cannot achieve anything. Realities about people. People who have a mental illness can be just as good a friend as someone who does not have a mental illness. Sometimes a mental illness can make it difficult for a person to work, same as a physical illness, but with proper treatment, a person with a mental illness can work very well. Some of the world's greatest achievers have had a mental illness. Myths about people. Mental illness is a sign of personal weakness. People with mental illness are to blame for their own problems. People with mental illness are self-centered. People with mental illness could snap out of it if they wanted to. Realities about people. Mental illness is a brain disorder and not a personal weakness. People with mental illness will get better if they are appropriately treated. Realities about people. People with mental illness may often feel embarrassed, or that they are inferior to others, experience low self-esteem, and low confidence. This is called self-stigma, and is made worse by the myths others have about people with a mental illness. Myths about treatment. People with mental illness will never get better. Mental illnesses are too difficult to treat. Realities about treatment. Most people with a mental illness will get well and stay well with the right treatment. Sometimes treatments will not be effective, just the same as with physical illnesses. Mental illnesses, because they affect how the brain functions, sometimes need more complex treatments. But this does not mean that they are too difficult to treat. Myths about treatment. Treatments for mental illnesses are not as good as treatments for physical illnesses. Treatments for mental illnesses are common sense, and everyone knows what should be done. Realities about treatment. Treatments for mental illnesses are as good and as bad as treatments for physical illnesses. Unfortunately, not everyone gets well with treatments regardless of the type of illness. Treatments for mental illnesses are based on the best scientific evidence, not people's opinion about what works. Bust myths, speak realities. Many people do not know about the realities of mental illness, and so they continue to believe myths. Once you know the realities about mental illnesses, you can help bust myths by letting others know the realities. Everyone can bust myths when they speak realities. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button to receive more. Like it in the future.